So everybody, good day and welcome to this live on ServiceNow webinar, where we will be talking about how to jumpstart your new hire experience with Now Mobile. In typical fashion, we do have to present the safe harbor slide. The good news is that everything that I'll be talking about today is part of existing product. We're not going to be talking about futures at all. There's one item I think I'll mention that is actually tied to the San Diego release, which is actually generally available today. So happy release day to everybody there. It's sort of a sentimental release given that ServiceNow was started in San Diego. So we finally reached our hometown release, which is kind of exciting. A few housekeeping items, right? So if you could just stay on mute, we are recording the session and it will be posted afterwards so that you can share with all your friends and coworkers. There will be a Q&A at the end, but in the meantime, while I'm presenting, if you have questions that you want to ask, please put that in the Q&A of the Zoom. And my partner in crime, Ricky, as well as some other team members are there monitoring the chat and will answer in real time or let me know if there's questions that we want to talk about live on the session. When you do ask a question, we'd love to know who's joining these sessions and where you're coming from. So please let us know who you are, who you work with. And again, when the session's complete, there will be a survey. So please take a few minutes and answer those questions so that we can make these sessions better as we go forward. So my name is Kevin Mackis. I'm a director of outbound product management here at ServiceNow, specifically within our employee workflows area. For ServiceNow, employee workflows encompasses HR service delivery, workplace service delivery, legal service delivery, as well as all of our employee experience products like Employee Center, experiences that we build out with Slack or Microsoft Teams, right? So those areas fall under the employee workflows umbrella. So I've been with ServiceNow for what will be 3 years on Friday. And I've been in the HR technology space for 18 years as of last month. And in that time, I've done, I've been a customer, I've been on the vendor side, I've done implementations, I've sold it, now part of product. So excited to talk to you guys today in a little bit more detail about specifically what we can do with onboarding and related to how the Now Mobile app can support the onboarding process. So on that note, let's talk a little bit about what the focus of this session today will be, right? So first, one of the things I want to do is just cover what will the onboarding experience look like for a new hire if they were using the Now Mobile app, right? And then talk about, as you think about deploying Now Mobile to support onboarding as well as other things, what are some things you need to be thinking about as you do that or before you do that? And then finally, we'll talk about what's involved in configuring and deploying the experience, because that part is actually very straightforward. And I want to make sure that it's clear that this is a pretty easy lift to add the mobile experience to any onboarding that you may already doing or getting ready to do. Some things I want to throw out as assumptions, right? First and foremost, right, if you're using the life cycle of event capabilities within ServiceNow to do onboarding, it means that you do have a license for our HR service delivery enterprise product, right? That's the solution that gives you the ability to do onboarding. So also assuming that there's some level of familiarity with lifecycle events, because at the end of the day, that's the capability that really drives and makes onboarding happen, right? That's the workflow tool set that we deliver in the product that allows you to do that, right? It does other things, or you can do other things with it besides onboarding, to manage offboarding or transfers or leave of absence. Obviously, for today, we're going to focus on onboarding. And to that point, right, there's also an assumption that maybe you already have onboarding deployed, right? Or you're in the middle of an implementation or getting ready to start one, and you want to have a mobile experience be part of the scope, and you want to gain some understanding around what that would look like. So before I go on, I think what I want to do is just put up a quick poll. We've got 2 quick polling questions. This will be the first one, right? For those of you that are out there, are you using ServiceNow to manage any employee journeys or lifecycle events? So the question would be, are you doing onboarding? Are you doing onboarding plus something else? Are you doing other things than onboarding, or you're not using it at all? Love to get that feedback. Great. So we got a little bit of a mix. Awesome. Great. Cool. That gives me a little bit of perspective of what the audience is up to and what you can be expecting. So it looks like there's a fair number of folks that are not using onboarding yet. So hopefully this will help paint that picture for you, and you can start to realize where there's value in not only using onboarding, but also having a mobile experience that can go along with that. So when you look at the big picture of what other pieces might be involved, right? So what are we not going to cover today, right? Is we're not going to talk about how to set up an onboarding lifecycle event. There are a lot of other resources out there that you can use to help you get started with that. There are other recorded sessions that we can point you to, but that's really the nuts and bolts of onboarding is setting up that lifecycle event. There's also a lot of other options and flexibility you have within Now Mobile for configuring it in general, right? For how your employees are going to use it. And again, lots of resources out there that will point you to for that. We'll talk a little bit about authentication because that's a hot topic when you're talking about new hires. But what we won't do is we won't get into the weeds of what all of those options are and what other options exist out of sort of the ones that we see used most commonly. And then the last piece is content publishing, super valuable part of the product that has, we could spend the hour just talking about that one topic alone, but it's also something that can provide a lot of value to the onboarding process. So I'll show you where it plugs in, but if you want to learn more about that, there's other resources out there. So to that point, before we go too much further, I need to do a little bit of a shameless plug for the ServiceNow community. And specifically, the HR Service Delivery Forum, helpful or most relevant to what we're talking about today. So within the HR Service Delivery Forum, there's a whole area just on enterprise onboarding and transitions, where you can learn more about how to use that capability to support onboarding and how do you configure and build that out. The mobile apps forum, tons of great resources out here about how to deploy mobile, how to configure it, considerations and things to think about when deploying a mobile app. Lots of great resources in that forum. And then the other thing that I'll call out is there actually is a blog post that is sort of the sister content to this webinar, right? So a lot of what we're going to cover today, obviously this will be posted and you can refer back to it, but there's also a blog post out there that covers this content in detail. All right. So now that we've got those sort of housekeeping items out of the way, let's jump into the main content, right? And I want to start by talking a little bit about what does the Now Mobile experience look like specifically for new hires, right? So for those of you that aren't familiar, right, the Now Mobile app is the primary app that your new hires, employees, and managers can use to interact with ServiceNow. And that can be for whatever services or content you deliver through ServiceNow, right? So if you think about having a portal experience, right, and you're offering IT services and knowledge or HR services and knowledge, the mobile app is just another entry point into that content, right? So that gives you that one app that everybody can use for that experience. Now, if you've been around ServiceNow for a little while, you may know that we originally did have a separate app for onboarding, right? And we did away with that because it really didn't make sense to have two, right? Like you had this onboarding app that somebody used just for onboarding for a short period of time, and then that sort of went away, and then they converted over to the Now Mobile app once they became an employee, it was a little bit disjointed. So what we decided to do was let's just have one app that can be used from beginning to end by a new hire and seamlessly allow them to transition into an employee and get that same experience, right? So in order to do that, we had to create a streamlined experience for those new hires, right? Because obviously when you're talking about a new hire, or the way that we define a new hire is somebody that hasn't actually started working for you yet. So they're prior to day one. So obviously security then becomes a key point of consideration, right? You don't want new hires getting access to things that they should have access to. So we know that, right? And we know who a new hire is. So we have a specific role that gets assigned to them. And once they log into the Now mobile app, all they're going to see is what you want them to see specific to onboarding. They're not going to have full access to your catalog of services or your full knowledge base. If you look at this example in the screenshot, right, the navigation on the bottom is very limited. There's not even a search option, right? It's just the items related to onboarding, right? And why is this important, right? Like, why do you want somebody that's a new hire to have this sort of access pre-day one, right? And there's a variety of reasons for it, and a lot of value that can be realized, right? So one is there's this typical black hole that happens between the time that somebody accepts an offer with you and the time that they actually start, right? So they just made this big decision to join your organization. They're excited about it. They're nervous about it. You want to keep them engaged, right? So how do you give them an opportunity to receive updates on what's going on? Have them start getting work done, right? Can they start reviewing some materials? Can they start doing things like verifying their information, or maybe signing up for direct deposit, so that first paycheck goes straight into direct deposit instead of having to cut a check, right? The other piece too, right, is when you talk about a new hire and the potential anxiety that goes along with that, right? Like, oh, I need to make sure that I sign up for benefits. By giving them access pre-day one, they can get to that information ahead of time and ease any of those anxieties that might come up. And by using one app for that, right, once they become an employee and they show up on day one, they can have that same experience, but then all of the employee capabilities can automatically get turned on, right? So we convert them from a new hire to an employee. Now they have that full access to search, to look at your full knowledge bases, get access to your full catalog of services, right? So now that experience has continued and it's evolved, right? And it's a positive one. That's what we're going for here with the mobile experience. The other big thing to keep in mind, right, is that your new hire doesn't have a laptop yet. They don't have a corporately issued device. So this gives them an opportunity to use their personal device to start reviewing and getting some of these things done, in lieu of probably not getting a laptop or other device from you until they actually start. So let's look at what the new hire experience looks like within Now Mobile, right? So keep in mind, and we'll talk a little bit more about this in a second, leading up to this point, right, we'll assume that you have an onboarding lifecycle event that is configured. Part of that lifecycle event, there's a notification that gets triggered to the new hire that says, hey, congratulations, welcome to our organization. We have this great mobile app that you can use to navigate your onboarding activities. Here's where you go download it. Here's how you log into it, right? So there's going to be some communication that happens that informs them that this app exists and how they get it and how they log in. So we'll talk more about that in a second, but let's assume that piece has happened, right? So they come, they use that notification, they download and install the app. Now this is the default experience that they would get, right? So back to my point earlier about security, right? If they don't have a new hire role, they're not going to be able to get in. If they don't have an active lifecycle event case that is for onboarding, there's nothing here that they would be able to see. So this is limited to new hires that actually have an active onboarding case in flight, right? So you'll notice there's a few different sections here, and we'll talk more about these as well, right? There's a video in this case, or there's some content. There's a tile here that's giving them a summary of what open tasks they have and which ones are overdue. And then there's a item on the bottom around open requests. But you'll notice even the navigation is pretty basic, right? There's basically this home page, there's notifications, and there are app settings. There's no other access to any other capabilities. If the new hire taps on the My Onboarding tile or section, right, they will then be taken to a detailed timeline view of the onboarding lifecycle event, right? So those of you that are familiar with lifecycle events, the way that those are built is you have activity sets, which are basically like swim lanes of time, right? There's, pre-hire, maybe pre-day one, day one, and then beyond day one. And within each one of those activity sets, you can actually insert your activities. So this is just a timeline view that shows those activity sets, right? And again, one consideration to keep in mind is that a lot of times there are certain things that you're okay with a new hire doing before they show up for work, but then there's other things that you don't want them to do until after they show up for work. And the way that lifecycle events work is you can put those conditions on your activities, right? So if there's certain things that you want to wait until they show up for, or maybe they need to sign a employee agreement or a non-disclosure agreement first, you can build that conditional logic in. So they can see a preview of what they might need to do, but they can't actually do it until they've met those conditions. So if I drill into the prepare for day one activity set in this case, then I can see the tasks that I need to complete. And then the new hire can tap into any one of these individual activities. In this case, it's watching a video. They can watch that video, mark it as complete, and now they've started to complete the onboarding activities, right? So very clean, easy to use, no training needed. If you use any other app on your phone, you can probably figure this one out pretty easily. So just to talk a little bit more about the layout here. So as I said, this is the out-of-the-box layout, right? And it's made up of a few different components, some of which you can see and some of which you cannot. So let's talk a little bit more about that. So this first section at the top is what we call a mobile content section. And this is tied to the content publishing capabilities that we have in the product. And what this allows you to do is publish content to different audiences based on criteria. And this can be published through the mobile app, can be published through push notifications, through your portal experience, through email notifications, lots of flexibility in how the content gets pushed out. The nice thing here is that the content, because it's criteria based, it's only going to show up when it makes sense, right? So in this particular case, this welcome message would only be defined for new hires, right? So only a new hire would see that, right? And you could further tailor it to say, here's the new hire message for those folks working in North America. Here's the welcome message for those people working in EMEA or the Asia Pacific region, right? So really it gives you some flexibility to get the right content in front of the person at the right time. So mobile content is what you would want to use if you want that flexibility. You can also have what we call static media content sections. And this is basically what it says, right? It's typically just, hey, I want to put a video or I want to put an image in the section. You can put a text description under it. You can also make it, you can link it to something as well, right? So like, let's say it's a piece of content that's talking about your campus. If they tap on it, it could take you to a page that gives you more details about the campus or whatever it might be. Those are more appropriate when you want everybody to see the same thing, right? Some companies will use it as a way to put like a logo in, right? If you're a large organization and you have multiple brands, right, or multiple business units, you might want to have a little bit of, you might want to promote that. You can use a section for that. The third area I want to talk about is this my onboarding card. This is what displays that summary of tasks that are open and overdue. The other section that gets displayed by default is called My Requests, right? So it's basically a summary of all the things that you have open. This is actually one that I would suggest, like if you're going to turn something off, right? This one's probably a good one to just turn off, right? Is a new hire going to have a lot of open requests beyond what would already be open for them as part of the onboarding process? Probably not. So I'm sort of a proponent of removing that section by default, and I'm going to show you how to where you can view that as well in a second. And then the nav bar at the bottom, right? Again, nothing that you need to do here because out of the box, because this is driven by the new hire experience, the new hire role, it's limited, right? There's only these three options that get presented, basically nowhere else that they can navigate to or other content that they can get to from here, right? So these are the sections that are sort of built into this homepage, or this, what we call a launcher screen by default. And you can easily add, remove, and reorder these as needed, okay? Just scanning the questions real quick. I don't know if there's anything that the team wants to highlight. I think it looks like the that last question that Sean posted, I think I answered that already, right? So the new hire, what's displayed to the new hire is based on role, and it's also based on how you've configured what they have access to. So as an example, right, I said that there's no access to like knowledge or a catalog at this point, but let's say you did have a knowledge base that was for new hires and you had a set of content that you wanted them to have access to, you could present that to them here, right? So let's say you have an onboarding knowledge base and there's like, you know, a handful of articles in there. You could present that and basically grant access to it by the role. So it would show up, right? And furthermore, you'd have flexibility in how you present that to them, right? You could add it to the nav bar as a navigational icon, or you could add it as a section, right? If it's a small set of content that doesn't require a lot of searching, you know, you could just make it available there, and they could click in to see the full list, right? So definitely options around providing new hires with access to other things if it makes sense. So I do want to talk for a second about the manager experience as well, right? Because I think that's the other piece here is that it's not just about the new hire, right? It's also about the manager, right? So if your managers have the Now mobile app on their devices and they want to use it to keep track of new hires, we deliver a section or a tile out of the box that does that, right? So in this view, this is showing Maria. She's a hiring manager. You can see because she's an employee, she has more options in the navigation, more things exposed on the home page here. But one thing that she does have is this track new hires section, right? Now this section displays automatically, right? So in reality, there's nothing that you need to do to make this show up, right? So it's a section that will display as long as the manager is designated as the open for person on the lifecycle event case, right? So the subject person would be the new hire, the open for would be the manager, then that section shows up by default. If it's a situation where the new hire if the manager has multiple new hires, right, then that section acts as a carousel and you can swipe through them to see the individual tiles for the separate new hires. And then when the manager clicks into that tab, there's a couple of different views they have, right? They would, by default, they see the tasks that they have assigned to them, right, at that point in time that they need to be looking at. But then there's also the timeline view that they can switch to sort of see the details of what's been completed in each stage of the onboarding lifecycle event. Okay, so that's a little bit about the experience. And again, everything I've shown you to this point is out of the box. There's nothing that you would need to do to make any of this behave differently if you didn't want it to, right? There's nothing that you need to do specifically in your lifecycle events. Again, whatever you've configured in your lifecycle event to this point is going to present within Now Mobile. Nothing special that you need to do there. What I want to talk about next is just some deployment considerations, right? So in my previous statement, right, I said this is all out of the box, pretty easy to set up, but there's also some things you need to think about when you're deploying a mobile app that you may not have thought about before, right? And things that you probably want to come up with a plan for first and foremost. So the first thing I want to talk about is, okay, we're talking about using Now Mobile for new hires, but have you deployed Now Mobile to your employees already? And if you haven't, you should probably consider doing that first. And here's why, right? So if I'm a new hire and I have this great mobile experience for onboarding, and then on day one, right, the app doesn't do anything else, right? Or once onboarding is done, there's no other reason for me to use it. Is that a good experience, right? Now, you can absolutely do that, right? You can just say, hey, we use this app for onboarding. And then when you're done, and everything else you need to do once you're an employee is available through our service portal, or whatever if you're using Employee Center for your portal experience, that's where they would go for that. I mean, that's fine. But I think what I'm saying is like, I would rather say, hey, figure out what you want to deploy to your employees within Now Mobile, so that then when you deploy it for new hires and onboarding, it's a nice seamless transition, right? That new hire gets a great experience. And then on day one as an employee, they're just getting more capabilities presented to them, right? Now I can search. Now I have more tabs in the navigation where I can get to other services and other knowledge components that I might be interested in, right? So if you're thinking about mobile, right, like as much as I would love you to use it for just onboarding, right, I think there's a lot of value in looking at it for your employee base as well. And one side note or thing I'll mention specific to mobile is you don't need to start at the point of trying to replicate everything that you do in your portal experience, right? Some organizations get hung up on that. They look at their portal and they're like, okay, everything that's here needs to be in the mobile app. And I would argue that that's not necessarily the case, right? So think about it this way. If I'm an employee and I'm working off of my mobile device, what are the things that I would need to do and expose those things only, right? There might be certain things that I would probably never need to do or want to do from my phone, but what are those high priority ones that I would, and start there, right? And then you can easily add more later, but just you don't have to think about it as replicating everything that's in your portal experience. The next big is authentication, right? How is a new hire going to log in to get any of this stuff done? And there's really, we'll say, two primary scenarios, and then maybe two variations of one of them, which is why we get to three here. So bear with me on this one, right? The most common scenario for authentication for new hires is that they will use a ServiceNow account where they will log in locally as a new hire, right? So every user, whether you're using single sign-on or local authentication, everybody has a user record, right? So what you can do is have new hires log in locally, and they'll probably do that with, say, personal email address or something like that, and then an automatically generated password. And then on day one, we can convert their account to use SSO, right? So up until day one, they log in locally. On day one, as part of your onboarding lifecycle event, they get a notification that says, hey, now that you're an employee, you can log into all of our applications using single sign-on. Here are those credentials, right? So this is probably one of the most commonly used scenarios for new hires is the new hires use local login, and then they convert to single sign-on. This other scenario that we've seen, and this is actually what ServiceNow internally does right? New hires actually use single sign-on, and we all use the same identity provider, right? So we use Okta as our SSO application. And once you accept an offer here at ServiceNow, you get set up in Okta and you log in to do onboarding through Okta using a personal email address, right? So when you log into the Now mobile app as a new hire, you get the same Okta login screen that you do as an employee. You're just using different credentials, right? And then similarly, right, on day one, right, we're just updating your user account to say, okay, now you're going to use your corporate email address instead of your personal one, right? So this is a scenario that we see as well, probably not as frequently, but it is out there. So again, keep that in mind as if you're haven't gotten to that point of figuring out how new hires are going to authenticate. This would apply as well. And this doesn't apply to just mobile, right? You'd have the same discussion even if you wanted them to log into a web-based portal experience. The other scenario we see is where new hires are using single sign-on, but it's a separate identity provider, right? So new hires use one identity provider and employees use a different one. Again, they get converted from one to the other on day one. The reason why I wanted to mention this is that this is the one thing that's new in San Diego. Prior to San Diego, the mobile app only supported the first two scenarios here, right? You could use local login and then convert to single sign-on, or you could use single sign-on, but just one identity provider. As of San Diego, the mobile platform supports having different identity providers for single sign-on. So again, not a super common scenario, but it does exist out there. So I wanted to make sure that you're thinking about it because it does impact a little bit when you do your setup. The next thing I wanted to talk about from a deployment consideration perspective is how are you going to distribute the apps, right? Like people need to be able to download the app in order to use it. So obviously the Now mobile app is in the public app stores, whether it's the Apple Store or the Google Play Store, right? Anybody can go download the app and get it that way, right? And for new hires, that's the most easy and straightforward way to do that. We also support what we call a branded app experience, right? So if you don't want to have the app be referred to as ServiceNow in the App Store, right? You can brand the app yourself and have your own icon with your own app name. You can change the splash screen and make it look like your own app and not a ServiceNow app, right? When you do that, you then have to determine how are you going to distribute it, right? We now support the ability to distribute branded apps through the public app stores, which is great, or you can distribute it privately as well. And the private distribution is typically when companies are using it just for employees, or they're using, let's say, corporate issued devices, or they have mobile application management applications in place like Intune or something like that, where you want to put extra layers of security in place, right? You want to restrict offline access, right? Or you want to restrict being able to take screenshots or something like that. That's another reason why you would distribute the app privately. But it is something you want to think about is, are you going to have new hires? You're going to use the ServiceNow app? Are you going to brand it? And if you are going to brand it, are you going to put that in the public app store or not? So if this is something that you're not familiar with, right, my suggestion is find the folks in your organization that do something with mobile apps already, and then this will probably make sense to them, right? A lot of times we talk to our HR partners, right, and like they know this exists, but they don't know exactly how it works in their organization. But there's probably somebody in IT somewhere that maintains other apps, and they can typically help out with this piece. Just a little bit more about the mobile publishing, right? This is included now, meaning anybody can publish a branded version of the app. And really the benefit here is like I said, it's really about customizing it to make it match your corporate branding, right? If you're a big recognizable brand name organization, you want to make sure that you reflect that from an onboarding perspective, and this allows you to do that. It's all built into your instance, right? So there's actually a wizard that you walk through. You specify the app name, the logo, the colors, all that stuff. And then behind the scenes, we generate the app. We give it to you to test, and then you can put it on the Google Play Store, or it gets uploaded to Apple Store as well. This is an example where if you go on the community in the mobile apps forum, they spell out very clearly how this works and what you need to do to get set up with it. All right. So again, those are some of the things I wanted to make sure you're thinking about that may not be specific to onboarding, but are things you need to think about when you're deploying either mobile or when you're talking about getting new hires access to ServiceNow. All right. So Max, I see your question in the chat about the configuration effort from switching, and I'll talk a little bit about that in this next section. But keep in mind, I think the thing you'll want to think about is you configure the new hire experience, right? Then you configure the employee experience. And then basically they're just converting from one to the other, right? So it's not so much the effort of switching is actually, there isn't really anything you need to do, because the role assignment, which I'll talk about in a second, happens behind the scenes. And that's what controls what they see. Do they get the new hire experience or they get the employee experience? It's more about thinking about, what do you want new hires to see and do? What do you want employees to be able to see and do? And then the switching part is actually pretty straightforward. All right, so that's probably a good segue into this first topic of what are some of the other pieces to the puzzle that you need to be looking at as you roll this out. And I want to talk about role assignment first, not because it is specific to mobile, it applies to anything that you're doing around onboarding. But when you start talking about having new hires access ServiceNow, it always brings in the security folks into the equation. What do you mean we're going to give non-employees access to an enterprise application, right? That conversation will always come up, and we want you to be prepared for that and be able to speak to it, right? So the primary thing to keep in mind is that we deliver the new hire role, right? And we deliver the ability for that to be managed automatically, right? So within HR, we have the HR profile, and within the HR profile, there's an employment type and there's an employment start date, right? So if the HR profile has an employment type of full-time or part-time or temporary, and their employment start date is in the future, right, we will automatically give them the new hire role and only the new hire role. Okay. Once they get to their start date, so the start date is equal to today, right, and the employment start date is either empty or in the future, they will automatically have the new hire role removed and the employee role assigned, right? So that is managing that automatic role assignment from one to the other, right? And because of what I mentioned before, right, the mobile app is looking at that role assignment to determine if it should show anything to that person, right? So if you had a scenario where somebody had an account, right, but they didn't have an onboarding lifecycle event active, right, they would literally get a blank screen. There'd be nothing for them to see if they logged in. So I think that's typically what ends up happening is the security folks sort of need to see that happen, or they need to understand how our role security works in the first place to build up that comfort level, right? And all of these rules and conditions are managed under client role assignment rules. So you can control this if you need to tweak the criteria or add criteria to make people more comfortable. And then just as another note, right, there's actually a scheduled job that runs that looks for these changes in the roles that need to be applied, right? So lots of granular control over that role assignment. Okay, next piece is how do you configure that homepage, right? Like, what do you need to do if you want to change that that onboarding homepage in the app, right? So what we're looking at here is I've, in the navigation on the left, I've gone to the launcher screen section because that's what those home pages in the mobile app are called. They're called launcher screens. And then I've just filtered it down to just the homepage views. There's, depending on what other apps you have, there could be a fairly lengthy list of launcher screens in here. But I just filtered it down to the homepage ones because that's all we care about as it relates to onboarding at the moment. So what you will see here is there's one homepage that is the main homepage for Now Mobile, right? That is the employee view, right? That's the simplest way to think about that one. Depending on how long you've had onboarding activated in your instance and how long you've been a customer, you might have this legacy onboarding homepage that is left over from when we had the dedicated mobile onboarding app. So if you never activated that plugin, you won't see this one. But it's more of a, if you did activate it at some point, even though you may not have used it, this will be out there. So you just want to make sure you're looking at the new one, not the old one. And then the one that you will care about is this one. That is the new onboarding homepage that displays in Now Mobile, right? So again, when you log into the app, it's saying, oh, new hires get this homepage, right? Employees, you get the third one there on the list, right? So this is where you want to drill into to configure what gets displayed, right? So now we're looking at that launcher screen, the details of it, right? And if specifically all the fun stuff is here on the body tab, right? So if you look, right, the UI sections that are listed here, those are the same ones that I showed you up front, right? You've got the mobile content, you've got static media, you've got the actual my onboarding tile, and then you have my items, right? You can remove any one of these rows, right? So literally, if you wanted to not show that my items, that requests, the my request at the bottom, click that X, click update on this screen, and that section's gone. Simple as that. If you wanted to add a section, right, you can insert a row. And again, depending on what other apps you have installed in your instance, right, there's a list of UI sections that are delivered out of the box that would be in there. So there's others that you could pull from if you wanted to. But at the end of the day, for onboarding, you really only need this one my onboarding section anyway. The other thing I wanted to mention, or you can reorder them as well, right? So if you want to change the order that they present in, the ordering can be adjusted there, pretty similar to how other things are ordered within ServiceNow. One thing I have not mentioned yet to this point is related to quick actions. So you do have the option of displaying quick actions to new hires in the app. So in this case, it's just the option to open a chat, right? But let's say you have virtual agent and you have conversations that are applicable to new hires. You could put virtual agent in there as well. Let's say you wanted the new hire to be able to ask a question of their onboarding specialist, right? You could add that as a quick action. So it's just another area of flexibility that you have to expose capabilities to your new hires if you choose to, right? So this is where the bulk of the configuration happens, and it's really just picking sections and ordering them. If you were to drill into the homepage for Now Mobile, right, there's a whole bunch of sections listed there too. And again, that's more about deciding what do you want the employee experience to be, right? And when you look at the employee experience, it's, oh, well, what other things do you have, right? Oh, well, we have IT services, we have HR services. How do you want those exposed, right? Do you want them on individual tabs, right? Do you want knowledge and catalog on separate tabs and you can search through everything at once? Those are just what I would call general design considerations and options that you have when you're deploying Now Mobile. So again, the employee homepage is probably going to have more on it. I will say though that there is the track new hires section for managers that you would want to make sure is listed in the sections for the homepage. and that one automatically, or I should say dynamically displays, right? So if I'm a manager and I have nobody onboarding, that won't show up. If I am a manager and I have somebody actively onboarding, that section would automatically or dynamically display based on that condition. So that section will be in the other homepage, but know that it's conditional and will only display when it needs to. Next topic I want to talk about, because it's an important one, is around new hire notifications. So when you install lifecycle events, you always have the option to install the demo data. And I encourage you to install the demo data because we give you a new hire onboarding lifecycle event in that demo data. That is a great starting point. It's a great example to use to get started. So that's one reason to use the demo data. However, one thing I will point out with that demo data is the notifications that we include. There's multiple, right? So there's just the general, hey, we've created an account for you, right? Here's the account, and then we send the password in a separate notification just for security reasons. And then there's a separate one that goes out about the portal access. So my recommendation is, I think this is probably a cleaner way to do this. So I think there's two things that I would suggest you do. Is I would say just have one activity that lets the new hire know about their account, and clean up the language in here to be more concise or clear. So what I mean by that is, hey, welcome. We have this great onboarding experience. You have a choice, right? There's a web-based experience that you can go to review your onboarding activities, or you can go download this app and use that. And then they have all the options in one notification. You don't have to spread it out over 3, right? It would be, here's your authentication options, here's your options from a experience perspective, and then just send the password in the second one and leave it at that. A little bit cleaner. The other thing I wanted to point out too is, as of Rome, we have support for what we call parameter-driven URLs. So if you've used the Now mobile app previously, right, you'll know that one of the things you need to do is when you launch the app and you go to log in, you have to put the instance name in first, which is sort of a pain. So in Rome, we added capabilities where you can embed the instance name into the URL. Excuse me. So you would have a link that says, hey, go download the mobile app. And then once they do that, right, there, you could have another link that says, log into the app, and that link would have your instance name as a parameter. So they would go right to the login screen, and they can skip that step of having to put in the instance name, which is super, super helpful from an experience perspective. So really think about cleaning up these notifications and making them more concise as you're rolling that out. The other thing I wanted to make you aware of, and this is part of what we deliver as well, is that day one change, right? So if you go back to that, what we call the most common scenario, right, where new hires are using local login and then they switch to SSO, we have two built-in tasks. One is a reminder email, right, that gets triggered to say, hey, here's a mobile app and a link to log in, right? And then the other one that we deliver is an activity that actually has a flow behind it, so that on day one, right, we're actually, let's assume that the new hire has logged into the mobile app, so they have an open session. We're actually going to terminate that session automatically. So on day one, when they pull up the app, they'll be forced to log in again and be redirected to SSO to now authenticate through that. Okay. So on day one, you want to make sure that you have these, or for day one, right, you want to have these activities in your lifecycle event. And that reminder email one, that's another one that you could sort of adjust as needed, right? It might not be a, hey, reminder about the mobile app. It could be the, hey, you now need to authenticate through SSO. Here are those credentials or those details. Okay. So again, we deliver these out of the box, but always want to check them to make sure that, you might want to tweak them to better fit your process and your needs, right? So that's another important one to look at. So, covered a lot of different things here, right? I think the things I want to make sure that you walk away with are, one, you need to think about those deployment considerations first, right? It's not just about new hires. Do you want to do something with about your employees and give them a experience in the Now mobile app? How are you going to get the app distributed to new hires? Are you going to create a branded version of the app and use mobile publishing or not? And then what's the right authentication approach, right? Those are actually probably the bigger discussions that go into this. Then the second set of things, which is more about the experience, right? Which sections do you want to use? What order do you want them in? Making sure that the notifications are streamlined and tailored. And then thinking about what content you want to push out to new hires throughout the onboarding process, right? Because you might want to sort of drip feed them different content to keep them engaged throughout the onboarding process, right? This is actually the easier part because the configurations are pretty straightforward in this part of it, right? The deployment considerations are probably where the heavy lifting lies. And then the other thing I want to mention too, right, is that this isn't a one and done, right? This is going to evolve and iterate over time. And that's one of the things I love about onboarding is that it only impacts those people that are onboarding, right? It's not like you're deploying something to your entire employee population and there's a ton of change management involved with it, right? And also onboarding can be pretty daunting if you're starting from scratch, and a lot of people get overwhelmed and they don't know where to start. So there's no reason you can't start simple, right? Automate the pieces that are going to give you the most value immediately, see how that works, collect feedback, make changes to the process or the setup, right? Improve the experience, move things around, expose other things, and then it will continue to get better over time, right? I know here at ServiceNow, they're constantly tweaking the onboarding process and the onboarding experience to make it better. So it's not a one and done, it's a living, breathing process. And you should definitely keep that in mind as you're thinking about how to deploy it and maintain it ongoing. So just a few other, I talked about the community and the forums up front. A lot of these topics are exposed there too, but there's a few things where I think the documentation is actually well covers these topics, right? So if you need more information on authentication or more information on configuring the media sections, right? Whether you want them to be for content or static. If you want to learn more about how to create a branded app through mobile publishing, or you want to learn more just about content publishing, right? Because that has a lot of benefit, outside of onboarding, right? You can use it for employees for just about anything, right? If you want to communicate about benefits enrollment or tax time at the end of the year, there's lots of good use cases for content publishing. And as a side note on that, right, if you go to the ServiceNow store, right, the ServiceNow store is where we distribute a lot of capabilities now. There are some things out there called employee experience packs, which are pre-configured solutions. And we have some for content publishing, like there's pre-built campaigns that give you all the structure, and then you can just go in there and swap out your own content. So you can get up and running very quickly with content publishing. So just as a follow-up, right, this group will be reconvening next Wednesday as well, where we can take your questions and have more in-depth discussion around this topic, right? If you're talking about whether it's strategically, how should you deploy this, tactfully, how do you need to, what things should you be looking at, turning on, turning off, or thinking about, that's where we can have this conversation can continue then. So looking forward to that conversation, and I appreciate everybody's attendance and attention today. Hopefully this will get you started to think about, how to deploy Now Mobile and the benefits that you can get from it for onboarding and your new hires. So thanks for joining, appreciate it. And any questions before we wrap up from the team that we might want to bring up? I've not been paying attention to the questions, so you guys will have to help me out.
Kevin, there was one question that came in through the chat, which is, can you speak a little more about the My Request in the launcher screen with some examples?
Got it. Yeah. So my requests are essentially, if you think about it, if you went to your internal portal, right, and you submitted a request to get tuition reimbursement, or you submitted a request to order a new phone, right, through IT, right, all of those things show up as my requests. So from a new hire perspective, those things would show up in that list, right? So as part of onboarding, right, you're probably linking out to other requests or services, right? So if you think about onboarding, right, hey, you need to go sign up for a corporate credit card, right? You need to go set up a travel account. You need to order your cell phone or your laptop, right? The onboarding process is probably creating requests for those things. So that my request view is really just sort of summarizing all those things that might be sort of spun off of the onboarding lifecycle event. Again, I think you need to determine based on your process, is that useful or not, right? I'm more of a proponent of keeping it simple, and all that stuff will be presented within the lifecycle event and those activity sets as well. So if the new hire sees it in there, right, they're going to know to go back there to look for it later. The my request could be a little bit confusing to a new hire that isn't familiar with how you operate. And then Ravi, I see your question about the my onboarding section. Will it continue to be available after the new hire turns to an employee? Great question. Can't believe I missed that earlier on. Yes, absolutely. The my onboarding section will stay even in the employee experience as long as that lifecycle event case is open. Once the lifecycle event case is closed, then it would go away. But then they could get to it later through the my request area, because that closed onboarding lifecycle event would be there, and they could still get into it that way. But just the section would go away once the case is closed. Great. Well, I think we've caught up on the questions. Oh, I see one more that just came in. Do we need additional configuration for the manager view? No. All you need to do is make sure that in the launcher screen for your employees, that the track new hires section is in there. And then it will just, like I said, it will then dynamically display if there's an open case and that manager is the subject person on the case. So as long as those two things are met, it'll show up. But always good to check that launcher screen, because out of the box it's there, but you never know who's played with the configs, right? If you've already deployed Now Mobile, somebody may have taken it out because they knew you weren't doing onboarding, and you just want to make sure that section is still in the configuration of the launcher screen. Great. Well, I know we are at time, so I think we can wrap it up for today. And again, thank you all for the attendance, the questions. The session will get posted very shortly once the recording has been packaged up, and hopefully you'll join us next week for the meetup. Until then, everybody have a good rest of the day, and speak to you soon.